Okay, so I'm going to walk you through creating a hollow form with this piece of green cherry. You can see it's cut in face grain orientation, so the pith of the log was here, the growth rings are this way, got sapwood out here. I've actually chiseled away a piece for my drive center in the headstock. I'm going to be mounting this between centers. My tailstock will actually have a live center here, and we'll start it out between centers, rough it out, and then start to show you the process for a hollow form. Okay, so you can see I've mounted this between centers. I'm going to start this piece out at a fairly low speed, little bit off balance, but not too bad. And we're going to just true up the bottom, and then we'll start roughing out the form here. See, at this point there's no real attempt to do anything with form. I'm just gonna work on actually truing this into a round cylinder type form, and then we'll go for starting to shape it after that. Okay, you can see the form is more or less roughed out here. Now I'm going to just go ahead and true up this tenon and get it sized properly for the chuck, and then we can probably start to rough shape this toward the eventual shape that we're going to want, and then spin it around and complete the shaping of the piece. Okay, so my chuck happens to have dovetail jaws, so I'm going to have to actually form the tenon with a little bit of a dovetail so it can grip properly. Just using a 1/2 inch spindle gouge to do that, shaped probably a little bit more like a detail gouge to put the dovetail on there. I want to create the tenon such that it doesn't bottom out in the jaws of my chuck, but has a nice flat shoulder for the jaws to register against back here. So a dovetail along the edge of the tenon, and then a flat shoulder to register against. Okay, now with the tenon formed, I can actually turn up the speed a little bit. I was operating probably around 350 to 400 RPM. I'll probably go up around 600 RPM for this now that the piece is balanced on the lathe. I'm going to leave a little bit of mass at the base of this that won't really be shaped too much, so that I can eventually have some capability to turn in the bottom. But I'll start to rough shape the piece now. think at this stage of the game it's probably reasonable to turn this thing around, reach through it, and start to come to the eventual shape that we want. Okay, I've got this turned around in the chuck now, and you can see I still have the tailstock here for support. Try to keep that there as long as possible, just to be on the safe side, and eventually we'll start to close into the top here and we'll remove the tailstock. But for the moment I think we'll turn the speed back down, get this thing started, and looks like it's running pretty true, so we can turn right back up here. At this point I think I'm going to go ahead and remove the tailstock and start to refine the top area a little bit. You can see that when I'm working on this, I'm actually sighting over the top into the light, which is back here, and I'm looking at the profile along the top. I'm not really watching my tool. Once I get started, I'm actually looking at the profile that I'm creating in terms of turning the form. I'm leaving substantial mass back here, and I'm going to create a pretty hard line here in a second so that I can see where the eventual form would go in and finish into the foot in that mass. But I want to leave the mass there so that it's there to support the activity of hollowing the inside when I actually start to do that work. I'm just going to go ahead and sharpen this gouge up, and then I'm going to do some final shear scraping passes on this to get it as smooth as possible. Try to remove any of the torn out grain.